What's something a dentist can say but a gynecologist can't? Looking good. I can really see the difference since you started using an electric brush. You're going to feel a bit of grinding. Let me know if you need a break. My, this will take some filling. I love working with kids. Please don't talk while my fingers are inside of you. That's a very large cavity. Smells like someone had the seafood platter for lunch. Open wide. I will numb the spot so you don't feel any pain while I drill. Surprise, surprise. Look at all these nice teeth we got in here. What is your opinion about Orn? Serious. I'm freaked out by today's Orn. 90s Orn storyline equals, how I got a raise at work. My hot, new neighbor stopped by. I love MILFs. Orn today. Caught my stepsister sniffing my underwear. My dad's friend helped me stretch my hamstrings. Proving to daddy that I really do love my new stepmom. WTF is happening? I wish they took the acting and story setup more seriously. I'm more stimulated by the situation than I am by just watching two people have sex, so I appreciate it when there's an attempt to make the situation seriously. I wish more Orn movies were made more like Hollywood movies. Not into videos, but I occasionally like to read erotica. The visuals in my head are always more appealing than what X actually looks like lol. That hit addictive as *UCK. Being an 18-year-old trying to limit it then quit it has become a crutch for pleasure. I don't like it as much as I used to. I find it damaging to my mental health too. I often see situations for what they aren't and see a chance to make a move when realistically I would be considered a creep. In fact, I hate Orn now. But if you watch it I don't care or hate you. I'm skeeved by not knowing if it's 100% consensual. Revenge Orn, hidden cameras, drug-addicted performers, withheld pay. You can't do it. And I'm getting old enough that seeing college-aged people in it just stresses me out. I don't care that it's legally allowed for an 18-years-old to be doing that. I know in my gut that it's ******. My current BF warped my view of Orn. I never had an issue with it before, and a few times a year I would watch it myself. Now? The lying, the hiding, the amount of money spent, the comments, the constantly comparing my body to theirs, the fact that he can't get off without viewing it or talking about it while he is inside of me, pretending to have the fetish he prefers going on around us while he is inside of me. It's been a train wreck on my mental health. I also have a young son and I worry about his exposure and him turning out to be like my BF. I've never said that out loud. It scares the hit out of me. Ethical or not, just like any drug including those prescribed to you, or can be detrimental to your health on ways you can understand you till it's potentially too late. Be wary. I'm also really happy to finally see so many people coming out with their own stories. I don't think banning it is the answer. I think transparency and education are. I would never wish what I'm going through as the partner of an addict on anyone. Booty can't imagine how much more difficult it is to be the addict. Normalized is very different than normal. Security guards. What's your creepiest, scariest story? My grandfather-in-law worked for a private security company as an armed guard for a while in the 80s. It was a smaller company that mostly loaned out guards for short-term work. Things like guarding construction sites, conventions, that kind of thing. Him and one other guard from the company were posted at a department store, mini-mall that had recently had someone drive a freaking car through one of the atriums Blues Brothers style. The guards were to patrol the mall and the outside grounds because with the atrium destroyed they had no real way to lock up the building, on account of the huge hole in it. They had put up some boards and such but it wouldn't have taken much at all to. Was all shredded and it had a bunch of infected wounds all over it. They guessed that it was probably rabid so they stayed well back from it. As soon as the commotion was over the watchman came on the radio in a panic asking what was happening. The old-timer had fallen asleep at the cameras and missed everything. He said that was the only time in his entire time as a guard that he ever even had to unholster his sidearm, much less fire it. Move them and get inside. The mall had a small bank in it as well as a pharmacy and electronic stores. The owners were terrified someone was going to use the damage as an excuse to break in, so they contracted armed guards to patrol it and had their normal night watchman, who was apparently a real old-timer, just kind of hang out and watch the cameras instead of doing rounds. Easy work, right? Well, the mall closes and my grandpa and his partner show up. They do a walk of the mall, test all the doors they can, make sure what alarms that exist are armed, all the standard stuff. They radio in Toth Watchman that they're going to do a once around the outside of the mall to test the doors from the outside and to check for anything odd. The watchman radios back an "okay," and they head out, each going different directions and locking the door behind them. My grandpa is walking along the back of the mall testing service doors and such when his partner yells at him over the radio, "The barrier is shredded. There's a huge hole. Get here fast." My grandpa takes off in a dead sprint. As he runs, he radios the watchman asking what's going on. He gets no reply. He radios him again, yelling, trying to get them to respond. Silence. He arrives at the barrier with the other guard, and sure enough, there's a hole just big enough for a person to crawl through that's been shredded out of the plywood. It looks like someone dug through it with something sharp. My grandpa crouches down and shines his light through the hole, but again, this is the 80s and incandescent flashlights don't exactly cut through the dark like the flashlights we have today, so he can see anything weird inside. He turns to his partner and says they need to call the police, but this being the 80s, cell phones aren't super common yet, so if they're going to do it, they need to get inside the mall and find a phone. They try radioing the watchman again and still get no reply. They get their guns out and squeeze through the hole and start advancing toward the security office. Most of the stores have shutters that are down, so it's a pretty straight shot. As they make their way there, they hear an earth-shaking loud scream. He said it sounded like a person with a chest the size of a car was just screaming as loudly and as savagely as they could. They both turn towards where the sound came from, which is a grocery store. It's the only store inside the mall that doesn't have a shutter on account of how large it is. They start moving that way because they still can't reach the watchman on Dare, worried whatever screamed may have him. As they get closer, they hear something tearing the place up, just raising hell in the store. They shout that they're security and that they're Armadan to come out with your hands up. No sooner than they had yelled, a huge ucking mountain lion threw its elf around the corner. Both him and his partner unloaded on the thing, just completely dumped their guns into it. My grandpa said that his partner was so terrified that he almost passed out. The mountain lion was clearly not well, as its face had a young female commit suicide in her car in the parking lot of a Harley-Davidson shop in the middle of the night. Years and other jobs later, I took new job and was seated next to a guy who turned out to be the boyfriend of the girl at the time. They were newly dating and he never understood what happened. I could tell the weight of it was still very much on his shoulders. I was able to confirm details as to what happened and answer questions. 2 weeks later, my previous job called and begged me back. I worked there long enough to run into this guy, share the story and set him closer to peace, then left and went back to my old job. Fate? Edit. I'll never forget sliding back in my chair to say, "Hey, I didn't mean to overhear you, but were you just talking to a coworker about losing a GF near a HD dealer in the past?" I was still new and hadn't even talked to him yet. Once we had a seemingly homeless guy crawl into a CRAWL space trying to hide in our casino. He suffocated and we found his body 5 days later after a smell and biomatter had appeared on one side of the wall. I've worked security on and off for several years to supplement my income, so I've heard quite a few creepy stories from coworkers. Probably the most legitimately scary story I've heard was from a guard that was working in a closed-down arena. The building is more than 100 years old but hasn't been used since the early 2000s. The city is keeping up with basic maintenance as it waits for a buyer. There's usually one guard assigned to the building. It's a 6,000-seat arena with a huge basement and 2 additional floors that have lots of old office spaces, dressing rooms and a separate, smaller community theater-type stage that's upstairs. The usual guard is doing his rounds through the building. The building itself is very interesting, as it's largely unchanged since the heydays of the 70s and 80s. The upper floors are largely darkened, are pretty creepy. Anyway, the guard is doing his normal rounds but feels unnaturally creeped out. It's his normal post, but something feels different today. He's feeling jumpy but shakes it off and continues. He's a very diligent guy, so he walks every floor of the building. He's in the very top of the catwalk system above the main arena where the old spotlighting equipment was. It's a narrow wooden catwalk system. Suddenly he hears a loud creak behind him, like someone is walking. He spins around and sees a guy standing there. The guy's is frozen mid-stride like he's been tiptoeing up. Behind him, guy has an unsettling, mischievous-looking smile on his face like he's been caught with his hand in a cookie jar. Dude has a big steel pipe in his hand instead of a cookie though. Guard pulls his gun and guy takes off running in the opposite direction and disappears into the labyrinth of the building. Cops come and sweep the building with AK-9 but don't find him. They do find that he's been playing in the dust that's on top of the old concession counters. He had written a bunch of bizarre helter-skelter type unsettling rhymes and drew a bunch of stick figures hanging from nooses. The speculation is it was some crazy homeless guy that had been hiding in the building a few days and Dodd made a game of following the guards without them knowing it. I saw the writing still on the counters the last time I was there. I was doing security in a hospital at the time, decided to do the basement patrol with a flashlight for funsies. I was sweeping the light into the offices when I saw a semi-transparent man staring back at me from inside one of the rooms. Well, I nearly hit myself before I realized I had caught my own reflection in the glass because of the flashlight. My dad had a job going around and checking school stuff, make sure everything was properly alarmed, locked down during summer breaks. Had about 15 to 20 on his list and would try to bang them out all in an evening so he could have the next few days off. Told me that one of the schools was a Catholic elementary school, very run down and old, always gave him the creeps. There was a room in there thought that a big SS Virgin Mary statue and it made him feel uncomfortable whenever he'd check in there, so he never spent much time hanging around that room. The last year he did that as a job, upon closer inspection, he discovered that the statue was actually hollow, so it could be moved around easier, presumably, and also that the eyes of the statue had small drill holes in them, so someone could hypothetically hide inside and watch people without them knowing. To this day that's what he speculates was happening when he'd be in there. Kinda far out there if you ask me, but it's creepy as hell to consider. Lol. My dad used to work security guard jobs after he retired because he could. He was on-site overnight shift at a paper mill here in Oregon that's part of a small town and is at the edge of the Cascades. He noticed over the course of about 3 nights that all of a sudden all of the little critters he was used to seeing in the lumberyard were just gone. It was weird and quiet, and he was about to set out on his rounds when something made him pause and take a big step backwards into the cover of the guard shack. It's a good thing, too, because the great horned owl's talons missed his head by about 6 inches. Those birds are ucking big, and they are territorial as *UCK. Dad said they stuck around just long enough to kill every living thing under about 30 pounds in the area, and then they moved on.